Pod in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pod My Noggin. On this week's episode, we are going to be talking to published author Ann Hince. Her book, A Pathway to Insight, talks about how she has moved through traumas and how she has healed herself in a very interesting way. A way that might be hard for the average person to hear, but I find it quite interesting. She talks about releasing tension, and we're going to head over and talk to Ann right now. Ann, thank you very much for joining us on Pod in My Noggin today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, I'm excited to have this conversation. I went on your website, and for anybody listening or watching at home, I'm going to link all of this stuff at the end and in the description, just so that everybody can go bask in Ann Hince, because there's a lot to take in and a lot to learn, really. And when I gave an intro just before now, I'll let you know that there's, I preface this interview that there's some interesting things about you that people might struggle to hear because of different stuff. And before we started recording, I discussed that with you too. So just to let everyone know, I don't think this will be the only time Ann is on the show. But I think where I want to start, as I said, is bring us back to younger Ann to start with, and take us through that a little bit.
Okay, let me first say that the reason I share my story is because I had never heard anyone talk about this before. I didn't know what I can do now was possible, but I want other people to know it is. So here I am.
And I love that, right? And that is so on point with what I'm trying to do with this show, is open up a space for people to talk about great things and adversity. Really, my thing is, you've gone through adversity and somehow you've come through to find your own definition of success. So, all right.
Okay. So I guess my story starts right at birth or even before, but I'll just start at birth. And I was born with my right foot up against my right shin. So the first 6 weeks of my life was kind of physical therapy to release that foot. So it wasn't. So
it was like this?
Yeah, the right foot was bent up against the right shin.
Oh, okay.
So a bunch of tension in different places in the leg, but it actually had twisted my whole body. It kind of torqued my whole body. So I've had kind of scoliosis my whole life. But I didn't know about that foot because I was actually handed over for adoption at 6 weeks after my foot was back to normal. So I actually didn't hear about it until many, many years later.
Okay.
So that was another trauma. I think everyone who's handed over for adoption has some form of trauma. And the parents I was handed over to had actually had a trauma because they had adopted a boy, so my brother, a couple of years earlier, and then they adopted another little girl. And the birth mother changed her mind, so they had to hand that baby back to the birth mother, and I was the replacement in the family for that loss. So it didn't start out so great.
That does sound uncomfortable, right? I mean, and you were so young, and I think there's a lot to be said and to be discovered by babies still. How do they process trauma? Are they aware? I think that they're aware to a degree and can hold that trauma, right? So,
right. Well, my mother didn't want to bond with me, right, the way she would have done with the other girl, because she would have been afraid the same thing was going to happen to me and that I would be given away again. So when I see the photo of her holding me, it's like she's holding me away from her. She's not snuggling me like, most mothers would with their baby.
That's a layer you probably I wouldn't have thought about until you just mentioned it either, right? Like you
Right,
think
but
in
I
your
also
mind,
didn't notice it until my birth mother saw the photo. And she was it was very clear to her that that was happening.
okay, all right. So this is how it all began.
Right. And then we traveled around the world. My dad worked for a telecommunications company, so we went to Barbados and then Sierra Leone in West Africa. And while I was there, we had a house fire. I was the one who woke up and saw the flames in my bedroom ceiling. So there was a good sized trauma there. And then we went to Hong Kong. And when we lived in Hong Kong, I was sent to a boys' boarding school in England. And it was my brother's boarding school, which is why I was sent there. And I was the only girl boarder in the school. So they had some day girls who would come during the day, but then they would go home at night, and I would be left with all these 9 through 13-year-old boys, which was not good. It was not a good time. They teased me mercilessly, so that was not good. And then in my teenage years, both my parents became alcoholics. And when I was 19, I woke up one morning and found my mother dead on the bathroom floor. So that was kind of a big trauma on top of many smaller ones over the years. So I moved out to California when I was 21 from England, and kind of hoping I left it all behind in England. It just doesn't happen that way. So I brought everything to the States with me, and I just carried on with life.
So I want to pause there real quick because you were living in England with your family, your brother and your father. Your mother had passed away. Why California?
Well, I'd actually met my now husband when I was 18 on a road in England. He was coming out to America, so I followed him 2 years later because my dad wanted me to stay at home and be his housekeeper, and I was not going to do that.
I'm with you on that one.
Good.
So wow. So you move off on. At least it wasn't alone. You had someone that you were moving to California with. That's a big change, though, I would imagine. To like now I'm curious. So, like, I mean, you've already lived in Barbados, Africa, um, Hong Kong, London, like England. Was it a culture shock for you to go to California? Because I would think that someone who just grew up in England and then went to California might have a culture shock. But you have had such a culture immense life already.
Yes, it wasn't a huge culture shock. It is going back to England these days because it feels so enclosed and so cramped because I'm used to the open spaces in California, the wide roads, the big buildings. So I do notice it now, but back then I didn't really.
Fair. So you get to California, I'm assuming move in with your now husband, and you start building a life for yourself.
Yes.
What happens then?
Well, I had 2 children, 2 boys, and I realized I was not as calm as I wanted to be as a mother. My boys were also growing up to the point that I knew I was scared of boys aged 9 through 13 from the boys' school. And I did not want to be afraid of my sons. So I knew I had to do something. But it was kind of in that time frame, they were probably around 4 and 8, something like that, that I had what I call a business altercation with 2 other mothers at their school. And these women, they were not like me. They were self-confident, self-assured, authority type women, and they told me I'd done something wrong. And I could not stop my mind spinning. It just went over and over everything they'd said and I'd said and what I did, what I could have done differently, just all the different permutations. And I could not stop my mind spinning for 3 days. And that's when I realized, okay, this is not normal. And I have to change. But I also realized in that moment, it felt a little bit like how I'd react when my dad would tell me I'd do something wrong. I'd done something wrong. That spinning, that total uncomfortableness. And that was the little opening, a little inkling that maybe my childhood was still affecting me to this day. So that's what I needed.
That's fascinating, for one, and I'll tell you why. That's a level of self-awareness that most people don't have. Like, that you could connect those dots in that moment, that you're realizing that you're having this sort of visceral reaction to someone telling you you did something wrong, and then linking it back to it being familiar to when your father did that to you, and then even entertaining that something unresolved from your childhood could be affecting who you are now as an adult. Like, that's like a level of self-awareness that's massive for someone. So,
But don't
and
you
was this
think?
with any therapy, or did you just get there on your own?
Yeah, this was no therapy. But don't you think a lot of us who do this work, who decide to do this work, we go right down to the bottom. We get as low as we can get, and then something happens. So there's some
Absolutely.
click, and that's what this was. It was just a little opening.
You know what's interesting though, I see you trying to sort of rationalize how you got that little opening, but I'm going to pull you back in, and I'll tell you why. People hit rock bottom and they don't know where to go. And this is what I see in mental health advocacy, and having worked in mental health. And often they'll turn to vices for coping mechanisms, or it takes either someone who is aware, or they turn to therapy to that, that little sliver of a spot that you said opened up for you. It takes another force to show them that spot. So like the general populace don't just connect those dots. And I say that so firmly and confidently, because it's to do that is just, well, first of all, it's incredible. So I'm praising you for finding that sliver of a spot on your own without therapy. So, and I won't keep you any longer. Keep continuing with your story. But yeah, I just want to call that out. That is,
Okay, thank you.
and yes. Okay.
But like you said, I did not know what to do with it at that point. It was just in that time frame I went to a doctor's appointment. I don't remember why I went to him. And he was a holistic physician, so he had more tools in his toolbox than many doctors do. And he recognized that I was more stressed than I should be, given I was a stay-at-home mother with 2 healthy young boys, right? That is stressful
Yes.
for a lot of people, but he recognized I was more stressed than that. And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was, and I said 8. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor, because those tears from that event, which was like 2 decades earlier at this point, the tears were still just under the surface. I hadn't dealt with it at all. And he happened to know this technique called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique, or tapping it's called. And he tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And it was huge.
So I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with tapping. I think that's the new age way of referring to it. Am I correct?
Yes.
People just refer to it as tapping?
Yes.
I was not familiar. I apologize. I'm just getting over bronchitis. So, if you watch my last podcast, which I think you said you had, I don't know if I had coughing fits or if I was able to take them out. But yeah, so every now and then I get a coughing fit. But the tapping thing I find fascinating. And I don't understand the science.
Okay.
And I think
there is
you
science
do.
behind
Yes,
it.
I think you do.
Yes.
And so I want to know, for anybody that's at home watching and listening. So like, first off, before we get into that, so 15 minutes with this holistic doctor who had more tools in his toolkit, right?
Right.
Did a 15-minute EFT, which, if I can remember, is emotional freedom technique. There we go. AKA tapping for the new age folk or the younger Gen Z people, because I think that's how they refer to it. What happened in that 15 minutes with that technique?
We talked through. So I related the story to him while I was tapping on the specific points that we use with EFT. And I let the tears flow. And at the end of the 15 minutes, I could tell the story to him without the tears there anymore. So the tapping is releasing the energy from the nervous system that is attached to that emotion and that memory. And if you do it long enough, then all the emotions have gone. So now that 1 15-minute session was not enough to release the whole memory, because there was a lot of different aspects to it that didn't come up in that 15 minutes.
Of course.
So I had to do it again many times at home. And as I did that, your subconscious mind is opening up. So that's what it's doing. So as you do that, more details of the memory come to mind that had been hidden underneath those big emotions that I hadn't dealt with. So I would remember small details of the story that had been hidden inside. So little aspects of the wound I was kind of opening up inside and cleaning out until it got to the place where, I can tell the story now, all aspects of it with no emotions there anymore.
I have to ask about the science, because this is fascinating to me. So there's five spots?
About 9 plus or minus 1 or 2. Some people use some different spots. They're the
Okay.
ends of meridian systems. So they're
And
kind of acupressure points almost.
what are they? Let's go through them.
Okay, the first one's the karate chop point on the side of the hand, like where you would do a karate chop. The next one's the crown point on the top of the head.
Like the soft spot?
Right in the middle.
Okay.
Right in the middle, right, the very crown, where it feels like it's, where the hair, if you have hair, it creates the little vortex there at the top.
Yeah. I always call it the soft spot.
Okay, and then the beginning of your eyebrow, and then the bone on the edge of the eye, and then the bone under the eye, then on the upper lip, then on the chin, then on the collarbone, and the last point is under the arm, where your brow strap would go across if you have one.
I don't.
Okay.
But
2 to 3 inches underneath your armpit. Yeah.
Okay.
And those are the points. And then you take a deep breath. And that's 1 round of EFT. So it's very simple, but very powerful.
So how long would you tap each section for, would you say?
About 5 to 7 taps. You're doing it. You're not doing it so gently that it doesn't do anything. You're actually trying to create an interrupt into the nervous system. You're not trying to hurt yourself, right? But so it's a fairly firm tap.
So that's the science thing.
Well, there's been a lot of scientific studies done on it, with brainwaves and all sorts of things. So it's definitely got some science behind it that proves its work. They've done studies on people, and yes.
I think, and so for me, when I say science, I often think about like the physical or even metaphysical sort of reaction or signal that we're sending to the body when we do specific things. So if we're tapping in these acupunctural spots, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind tapping is to disrupt the nervous system.
Right, disrupt the normal of it, yes.
The normal, yes. So we want to tap not so hard that we're inflicting pain, but hard enough that we're registering that we're tapping. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's a big distinction, because when I first did it, I was like, tap, 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 tap. Like, I'm like, hi there. But no, we really want to get their attention, but we just don't want to cause them bodily harm.
Right. And one of the key things that, there are many, many videos online, right? EFT's been around for a while now.
You have videos online too, though.
I do, yes. And I do that because a lot of the videos have moved towards the positive, right? And what I've realized in my journey, it's only the negative that is stored as tension in our body, right? It's those negative emotions. That's what we need to access. And if we access them with our own words, it's so much more powerful than using someone else's words. So a lot of people have scripts online, they use the same words, or you hear someone else's words and you tap along with them, but it's not going to be nearly as powerful as if you tap on your own words, your own story, or the words that resonate inside of you.
So can I ask you to give us an example, like right now, of maybe something that you would have done around that time with the tapping to demonstrate what it looks and sounds like in practice? Do you feel comfortable with that?
I do, but I don't think there's any point in talking through my story. Let me just do something general
Yeah,
the
sure.
people.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So so maybe I'm afraid of making a phone call.
Okay,
Right.
perfect.
Right.
No,
So
lots of people who don't like that.
right. So I just start tapping on the side of my hand. We do a setup phrase. So here I just say, I'm afraid of making I'm afraid of making this phone call. That's my truth in this moment. And it's okay that I'm afraid of making this phone call.
Okay.
And then we start with the other points at the top of the head. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Then we move to the next point. I'm afraid of making this phone call. Now we might expand on our words to bring up the emotion, to bring up that fear. I'm afraid of what they might say. I'm afraid that I might say something stupid. So I'm afraid of making this phone call. I'm afraid of making this phone call. And we're just moving through the points I know on the chin. And then I go to the collarbone. I'm afraid of making this phone call. And then under the arm, I'm afraid of making this phone call. Take a deep breath. That's one round of EFT. So now you go back and see, it's like, am I still as afraid of making this phone call, or is it decreased a little bit?
Well, I'm definitely not afraid of making this phone call now.
Okay, good.
Right? But so what is interesting though, while I don't resonate with the phone call thing, and I was listening to your word, I could almost feel some sort of like calming something come over
Yes.
me when I was doing that step. So I think that that's fascinating. And so would you repeat this? Like, so say for instance, in your life, when you started doing that 15-minute session with that doctor, what steps did you take after to start changing your existence? Really, I think that that's what we did. What you did there was change your existence.
Right. Well, I wanted to check it out first because I have an engineering background and I didn't necessarily believe that it might have been a fluke, right? So I actually wanted to try it out on something first. So I had a cat at the time. He was 17 years old and his kidneys were starting to fail. So I had to give him a daily saline shot, so an injection of saline, and I hated shots. So the first time I gave him one, my hand was shaking so badly. I wasn't going to be able to do it every day. It was just too stressful. So I thought, well, let me try out this technique. And so I did. So I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat with the injection. And I tapped about all the memories of all the injections I had had in my life. And the next day, the needle just slid right in. All that fear that had been living inside of me, inside of my body the day before, had totally disappeared. So that was the freedom I was looking for. It was on the other side of all those emotions, of all that fear. And I realized at that point, okay, that's all I've got to do. I've got to feel those emotions and I've got to get to the other side for the freedom that I was looking for. So I started noticing during the day when I was emotional. And then I would tap, I'd bring myself back to peace. And I would just do that over and over again. And I could tell that I was starting to become more peaceful inside.
What I love, and until you said it, I forgot that I read it. You have a very analytical, logic-based background. And you had just said you were an engineer, but can you tell everybody what type of engineering you were in?
I was a software engineer.
Yeah. So like zeros and ones, and this is going to have this reaction and this is going to have that reaction. And if it doesn't, there's something wrong in the code and we have to fix it. So it's very like logic based. And so I love that your initial response, and it's weird because it wasn't intended to, but it validated my initial response as well. Was that you weren't sure if this was real, or so like you had to put this through your own rigorous rounds of UAT testing, if you will, to see if this was something that was real. And what's interesting, when I was looking at your website, I was watching some of your videos, and we talked about this for a second. And we're on a future podcast. We are totally getting into that because I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. But it was, I think we have these weird. You had mentioned it. yourself that when we look at certain things or when we hear certain things, we have reactions to them, and it's based on our past or our belief systems. And it's so bizarre to think about. And anybody who's listening, I definitely encourage you to go get the book, go and check out the YouTube videos on EFT and on the other stuff that we're going to have a conversation about. And one word, I want to be honest with you and transparent, because I like to be this person, right? And talk about myself in a vulnerable state. When I first started watching you, the word kooky formed in my mind. Okay? And then what's interesting about that is that I have to recognize as a human being, because I have also had trauma and come through in a great way, but in a different way, right? Not through tapping or your experience, but in my own experience. But what I recognize is that sometimes people's beliefs or things that we see or experience disrupt our sensibilities so much that they make us uncomfortable. And so we try to like label it and push it away. But like for me, when I saw that and I had that word come to mind, I was like, no, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to continue watching. And I want to learn more. Because if we just shut out the world, the second we feel like we don't agree or it makes us uncomfortable or we think it's a hoax or whatever, how do we ever grow? How do we ever learn? So you've given your cat the needle. You're bringing yourself back to calm at work. How are you managing with your kids approaching the dreadful age of 9 to 13?
Yeah, I'd done a lot of work by then. So it was all good by then. And, you know, one of the things that I love about this process, which honestly to me would have seemed kooky as well at the beginning, but, you know, it's so obvious to me now. It just, that, yeah, so I had done so much work that I was calm. And because I was calm, my household was calm. So it was a huge change, and I didn't really realize when I started it how much it depends on us. Right? All we have to do is change ourselves, and then the things around us change. But I know many people don't understand or don't believe that either. You've got to go through the past, and you've got to make those changes in order to see that it's the truth, and then then it becomes easier to take responsibility.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I've had this conversation on my podcast and I was just a guest on someone else's talking about this very thing, but through a different lens. And in the sense of, showing kindness to yourself. At 35, I tried to take my life. I had a lot of trauma, a lot of issues up until 35. At 35, a new piece of information was introduced to me, and it was called cognitive restructuring and radical acceptance, things I had not heard before. And those two pieces of information, with my willingness and capacity to try and be better and to dig myself out from this hole, I was able to employ those techniques repeatedly. And what's interesting, if you watched a previous podcast where I talk about this, you're doing the tapping and changing your life, and I'm doing the cognitive restructuring and changing my life. And what the end result is so similar in the sense that exactly what you just said is that when you became calm in yourself, your external life became calm. And it starts from inside here. And we grow so much as humans when we begin to facilitate that healing and hold space and show up for ourselves. And I love how fascinating and nuanced this conversation has become. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Life in Stitches by CK Sims. Available for purchase in paperback and ebook on all major platforms. Partner today with CK Sims and Pod in My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pod in My Noggin. Before the break, we were talking with author Ann Hince about her traumatic childhood and her becoming a mother and migrating from Britain to California and realizing that she wanted to make some changes in her life. Experience with two mothers at her son's school opened up a sliver into her past that she followed, and she was able to discover EFT, which is an emotional freedom technique, also known to the younger generation as tapping. So we were talking about tapping and you getting more calm and your external life was changing. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Because like you're I feel like this was years ago when this happened. So like what's happened since then?
Okay, it was years ago. And things started to change, but I wanted more and I wanted it to go faster. So I wrote down every trauma that I had, like every negative belief, every phrase that my parents had said, and like, things like, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about, those kind of things. And I tapped through one each night for about an hour to an hour and a half each night.
Okay.
As those weeks went by, things just changed faster and faster. And it got to the point that I remember opening the kitchen door one day and just thinking, it feels like I'm living in a different reality, because my mind, which had been so busy and so judgmental and so critical, it didn't have those thoughts there anymore. They'd gone. And that's when I realized that those thoughts had been my dad's phrases that I had taken on in childhood and just, criticized myself or judged other people. But they weren't mine. They were his. And probably before him, they were probably his dad's or someone. But I didn't see that until they had gone. But it was really nice to be in that new mind.
Well, doesn't it feel, and I have to agree with you, it does feel like it's like a different reality or a different dimension. And to be someone, like I really do believe you and I are kindred spirits in what we've experienced in our lives to degrees, right? And I just think that when you get to the place on the other side, right? And for anybody that's like at home watching or listening, like this work is real. It's achievable. Not just Ann and I have achieved this. Getting to the other side where those awful thoughts or how we treat ourselves internally or externally or these faulty assumptions that we built our lives around, all of that stuff, they start to disappear, they fall away, and we feel a sense of freedom and warmth and calmness that we didn't know existed before. This is real, tangible, like you can feel it too. So I would recommend going and learning about EFT from Ann's YouTube channel, where she does walkthroughs to help you. She also has a workbook, which is a co-companion to your book, right?
Yes, it'll bring up all sorts of things for you to tap on.
Yes. So, and I love this. So like, there's a component of your story as well that moves into what I also find fascinating is that we hold these beliefs not just here, but here in our physical body. It's not just a weight in our minds. And I want to talk about that. And perhaps maybe like, is tapping how we release that physical side too? That's my question.
It does, but we're not aware of it necessarily at that point. So what I
Okay.
realized the EFT is doing is opening up the subconscious mind, and at the same time, it's kind of one and the same thing. Our self-awareness deepens.
Okay.
So when I started this journey, I didn't really know how I felt because I'd suppressed my emotions so well for so long. You could probably relate. So as I went down this path, I became much more aware of them. And then I became aware at a deeper level, which is the physical sensations underneath the emotions.
Okay.
So when we say we're something like frustrated, we're actually describing where we're holding tension in our body that we recognize by the word frustration. So we can kind of reverse that process. Okay, when I'm feeling frustrated, where am I holding tension in my body? So that's not something anyone can necessarily do at the beginning. I could not have done it when I started this journey. So if you're listening and you can't do it, don't worry. But if you can, that's a deeper level of self-awareness than just being aware that you're frustrated. Yeah. So when I got to that level, I didn't feel like I needed to use EFT as much. I just focused on those sensations. I do what I call feeling your feelings. I was just focusing with awareness on those sensations. And I would do it again and again, just like with EFT, right? We're using words with EFT. We're using memories and bringing up emotions. Now I'm just feeling the sensations of the emotions until those are released, and then I'll do it again and again and again. So it was very powerful, but it was different.
So I'm curious now. Like when I get frustrated, I hold it in my jaw. Now I can't tell you where all of my emotions live, but I do know that frustration lives right here in my, mostly here is where the pressure will, but it'll radiate out through the jaw. Anxiety and fear live in my tummy, which is normal for so many people because the gut brain is more complex than our brain. So so let's just say for a moment that my frustration's in my jaw. What would I do now if I'm frustrated and I just want to perhaps not do EFT, but do what you're talking about, focusing? So am I zeroing in on the tension that's in my jaw?
Right. You're keeping that feeling of frustration inside of you. Right. So whatever thought or whatever it is that's in your mind that has the frustration, keep it there. And I would actually hold myself like a statue. I realized if I took a deep breath or if I moved, I would lose my focus. So I would hold my breath and I would talk to that tension in my mind. It's like, okay, I can feel this frustration. It's hard for me to say that and focus on my jaw, but
Yes.
but you could be focusing on your jaw, right? So I can feel this frustration in my jaw. So you're just using the words to keep your focus on that tension in your jaw. And obviously, if you're holding your breath, at some point you'll need to take a deep breath, right? And then I would think the thought again that had the frustration, and I would notice that it would have shifted a little bit. It might have decreased in intensity. It might have moved somewhere else, but let's assume it's in the same place. And I would just do the same thing again. Keep that thought in mind that's frustrating. Feel that tension in my jaw. And I would just do that again and again. Same thought again and again until the jaw is able to relax while you're thinking that thought. So the frustration releases.
Okay. And I think what's coming up in my mind too is that this is similar to mindfulness. Are you familiar with like the mindfulness? Gosh, my brain just went blank.
I tend to think of mindfulness as being in the mind and not in the body. This is beginning to move into the body from the mind. We're just using the mind as a tool to keep our focus on the tension in the body.
And I think you're right. I do think you're right because I think there's multiple variations of what mindfulness is in the world. For the one I went through a seminar once, I did not find it helpful because I wasn't ready to find it helpful. But it was more so meditation and being still and being cognizant like of how your body's feeling in that moment. What is it feeling? Like, do you feel the hair on your toe? Weird example, but most people have little hairs on their toe. Can you feel it? Can you feel the pressure of your sock on your toe? Can you feel an ache or something? And then focus in on that ache and put your energy in that ache in your wherever it is in your leg. So that's why it was sort of like ringing a bell in my head
Right.
of mindfulness.
Yes.
So this is fantastic. So you were able to move from EFT into
Feeling your feelings.
feeling your feelings and
Mhm.
also but feeling where your feelings are living in your physical body and then
Right. And
allowing
feeling
them.
and focusing on them. Yes, and allowing them to release. So then in the evenings, instead of doing the tapping, which I used to do, I would lay on the sofa and I would bring collective traumas to mind. So things like 9/11 or the Loma
Mhm.
Prieta earthquake or the tsunami, all those big things that we just see on the news, but we don't really process those emotions. So I would bring those memories back to mind and just feel all those sensations that were left inside of me and just allow them to release. And it felt really, really good. But in the process, it was focusing or honing my ability to focus on those sensations.
It's brilliant because I think that point that you just made too is also very important. When we look at all of the stuff and the atrocities that we see on television and we see them and we think to ourselves, oh my God, that's terrible. I don't think that we believe that we have to process them because they're not affecting us. But I think that you're very right in the fact that when we see these things, when we see things like the Israel Hamas conflict, when we see things like the earthquake, the tsunami, they have an effect. We're going to hold on to that. And I think the other part that I'm really loving about this conversation too, and I want to explore this more in future shows, is the physical side of trauma. Because I do recognize that we have trauma in our minds and complex emotions that we have to work through, but they also live in our bodies.
And that's what I realized. So that was kind of my second step. But as I was doing this work, laying on the sofa, one day I noticed I could put my awareness inside my body. And it was very different from not inside. I could tell the difference. I didn't know what I was doing. And I just started playing around and realized I could move my awareness around inside and I could find tension versus no tension. So, I could go on to that step, but what I realized is that it's all stored physically. It's just we're not aware of it, right? Until our self-awareness gets that deep. Then we're very aware that it's stored physically because we can feel it, we can sense it. It's just we can't do that until our awareness is deep enough to sense it.
That's fair. Because I don't think that my awareness is deep enough to sense it, but I think that my awareness is just at that stage where perhaps like I'm recognizing that this could very much be a whole nother level of healing that could happen within me on the physical side.
Yes.
Right. And I think
Right.
for people listening at home or watching at home, you may not be even at the place where you've realized that you have healing to do, or that you may not be at a place where you, before perhaps today, you may not have known how or where to start, or you've tried things that weren't effective. And it's a journey. It's not a race. It's a marathon. When you're trying to heal yourself, one thing I always want people to remember is that this is the long haul. Like, yes, you want to get healed, you want to be functional, you want to be the calm mom, right? But it's not going to happen overnight. And you have to be kind, and you have to be consistent, and you have to show up for yourself. And I had just finished saying in a previous podcast was that when I started making this change, I recognized that I had the capacity and the willingness. So I think how that translates into this particular conversation is if you have the willingness to try something new, even if it does seem kooky, right? Okay. Try something new. That's a great starting point. But then also recognizing that you have the capacity. So, and what I mean by that is that don't look at the top of the mountain as the problem. Look at the first 3 steps in front of you, because that's all you need to do. If you went to bed tonight and you spent 20 minutes tapping, as Anne has showed you today, talking through something that's been bothering you and just giving it a shot, what do you have to lose to start that journey, right? So I'm being mindful of time, and this has been such a great conversation, and I think that it's really, I'm really fascinated with your story and the EFT thing. So, like, for to be fully transparent, like when I'm done this interview this evening, and I will go away and I will sit on the couch, I'm probably going to do some tapping and see what it feels like in that sort of situation. Because like right now I'm doing a consulting gig and it's very high stress. So like, how do I, and I'm holding it right here, I can feel it right now, it's very here. But so how could I apply this to this? And then I want to see what that looks like. So I'm curious enough to like dive in and give it a shot, just like you were.
Cool.
When when I was reading on your website, you've been doing public speaking for a really long time. I believe that you were 20 years ago. You were a part of, and the name is escaping me now.
Toastmasters.
Yes, Toastmasters, and you
Yes.
won an award in Toastmasters. So you have different things that you do, speaking and keynote speeches on, and that sort of thing, right? One of the things that drew me into that I want to talk about is the world right now is, well, it's on fire. We know this. Or I think it's on fire. Maybe you don't. But one thing we can see a lot of is people talking about manifestation. And, how I've learned sort of manifestation is through thought, which is, I think, the main medium that's on social media and whatnot. And, I think one of the things I looked for the longest time was a real life example of how somebody manifests something. And it was a very short clip I saw Jennifer Aniston actually say. And she spoke a real life example of what manifestation looks like to her. And that had a profound impact on me, because then I was able to take it and start using it in my life. And oh boy, like I'm not a billionaire or anything like that, but 2024 has become the year of CK. I've stepped out from behind fear. I started a podcast, things I would never dream of doing before. Too insecure, too afraid, too, no. I wrote a book, I'm putting myself out there in ways, I'm taking up space, and I'm asking for my worth. And like, so this is happening at 43, and the things that I am manifesting are coming to me. And like, one of my key points that I will never forget is I did a podcast. It was episode 5, I think, of my podcast. And I was talking about, the struggles of starting up a podcast and all of that sort of thing. And part of that podcast was me saying that I want to meet interesting people who have struggled, people who have persevered and have found their own definition of success. And I want to find a way to connect with these people and have these great conversations that other people can begin their healing journeys from. And I spoke it out into existence, put it out onto my podcast. And like 2 days later, I get a notification on Facebook of podcast support community. And I'm like, huh? I'm like, I like, what? So I click on it, and you can ask by hashtag be a guest or find a guest and post what it is you're looking for. And I post what it was I was looking for. And I went from having no guests because I'm this brand new podcaster to having more guests that I could handle, and having to be like, oh my gosh, I have to actually like go through and do some sort of like matrix or something to figure out if these are a right fit for my show. So I think that was a really great example of manifestation in my life, because then in addition, not too long ago, when I'm like, I'm not getting all the kind of guests that I want to get, and I'm like, there has to be another solution. Then the platform I found you on, that we connected on, was an ad. And I was like, what's this? I click it and I sign up. I fill out very basic information because I'm not convinced yet, right? Just like you, I wasn't convinced. I just did a little. And within hours, I was getting like so many messages from people who were resonating with the tagline of you've struggled and you found your definition of success. And this is where you came from. And we're having this incredibly wonderful conversation. So I'm also a chatty Cathy, if you will. So I want to pass it back to you. I want to talk about how your talk is about manifestation, but from a physical sense. Am I correct?
You're talking about the changes that I had physically, the physical changes?
Yes, but like there was a physical manifestation part on your website.
Okay. So I'm thinking that's the physical changes.
The physical changes. Okay.
Am I correct? Or are you thinking stuff? Are you thinking manifesting things?
Oh, well, maybe I misread the piece. Maybe because there are changes that we talked about, but I read it as in, people think that manifesting things is only in thoughts, but
okay, I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with you. Yes. A lot of the law of attraction people are talking about, they're just talking about the thoughts, but that's not the main thing. So I think of the whole of us as a signal. Everything about us is a signal that we're emitting to the universe, and we're attracting back based on that signal. So think about, if you grew your hair, if you put a wig on and you went out into society, you would get different results back. Something would change because you had changed your look, right? If I let's see, if I went out, if I cut all my hair off, right now I went into society, I would attract different things back. People would say different things to me.
Mm-hmm.
I would, because my signal had changed. So I wear blue all the time. If I went out wearing red, people would talk differently to me. So that's an outer part of our signal. It's also about, our gender. It's about our shape, our size. All of that is part of our signal. But because of this inner work that I've done, right, I know that we're pulled out of alignment through our connective tissue, through the tension held inside, which pulls us out of alignment with a force of 2,000 pounds per square inch. It's massive, this tension pulling us out of alignment that, again, we're not aware of until we are, right? So I'm aware of that tension from my foot starting in my cheek. It's just absolutely mind-blowing, the amount of tension that was stored inside my left cheek my whole life, since when I was born, that I was not aware of until just a few years ago. So that tension from our past is the biggest part of the signal that we emit. So if we really want to change our lives, we go back in and we do this inner work. We release all our traumas, we release all those emotions that have been stored inside, and we come back more into alignment.
So release from the body. Using
any of these techniques, yes, it's all working at the physical, we're just not aware of it. Yes, and that changes us more into alignment.
This is so fascinating, because when I'm on this journey and I'm trying to, with the law of attraction, rework my mind to stop having limiting beliefs, for one, because I had a lot of those.
Can I stop you right there?
Yes.
For a moment? Okay. So the way I do it is I would find those limiting beliefs and I would work with them to release the energy of them so that they're no longer left inside my body, right? Because if I'm just suppressing them or pushing them aside, they're still inside of me, right? They're still affecting me.
This clocks for
right?
me. Like it's total for me. It's totally making sense what you're saying, because the traumas from your childhood, those limiting beliefs, all of those things, they're stored in us. So, like, my question to you is, and maybe you don't have the answer, but if we've worked through it in our minds and we're good there in a lot of different places, like, does that remove it from our bodies, or is it still stored in our bodies and we have to go back in, find it in our bodies and release it?
If you can, it's probably still in there. You can't really just think it away. There has to be some somatic aspect to it, right? The tapping works in the body, the feeling, the sensations works in the body. We can't just do it with our minds because it's still there. Now, when you said about asking for guests for your podcast, there was no resistance that I could pick up in you to that phrase. Right. So I don't think you had any negativity or resistance to that, which is why it flowed to you. But if you're thinking, I want to be a millionaire, but you have all these beliefs that are pulling you off, then you've got resistance to that. So what we need to do is find the resistance to it, find those negative beliefs, work with them to let them go so that when you say I'm a millionaire, there's no resistance there anymore and it can flow to you.
So I'm going to go on a journey this evening. I'm going to find that millionaire resistance and like kick it out.
And that's some of the things the workbook does. It has all the questions in there to bring up all the resistance.
So now I'm just going to have to buy the workbook and go through the workbook, because what you're saying, and this is just, it resonates with me because it makes sense. Because if you just think about things very simplistic, you get stress. The stress is in your head, but it lives in your body. Stress increases cortisol. It has issues on your respiratory system, on your cardiovascular system. Then, stress is what? Called the silent killer, right? So what you're saying completely, like, it clocks, because why wouldn't
and if you think of physics, right? Yeah. Physics and electricity, right? Resistance, stress is resistance. It's preventing the flow of energy. So you're not going to get what you think you want if you're resistant to it. So we've got to find the resistance, clean it out, let it go so that the flow of energy works, right? It's just a clean flow.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the other part is that I know that there's resistance in here. Right? And it's annoying to me because the resistance is no longer up here, but there's still resistance somewhere. It's almost like a gut feeling, or like almost like a heaviness in the stomach or something like that when I am working to try and attract something specific. And so there's work to do. So I want to ask you today, would you come back and talk to me in the fall?
Because sure, I would love to.
Because there's other things I want to talk to you about. But what I also want to do is take the next few months and start tapping. And I'm going to buy your workbook. I really want to go through that. And then I'm going to give you like a real live review on a podcast and be like, this is what, happened from this. And maybe we'll do it in person, because that time I'll be a millionaire. And I can just fly you in, or I'll come to lovely California. I've only been to San Francisco and it's the coffee place, Seattle in California. Am I a terrible person? But it's above California, right?
Yes, Seattle is above California.
Okay, that's why I thought, because a flight once dropped off in Seattle and then went to San Francisco. Sacramento is where I'm thinking of, y'all. Just FYI. Not
Okay,
Seattle.
I'm not far from there. I'm like an hour and a half from there.
Yeah, so I went to Sacramento, and I've wanted to spend time in LA and California a lot over the last couple of years. Like I feel like a really heavy pull there to the earth and the region and the water and the coastline, and there's just like a pull there. So like there's something that I need to be there for. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go there and find out what it is. So who knows what the future holds, but this has been a incredible conversation. I am so grateful for you to be on this podcast and share with us today. I'm going to get you booked in so we can have you squared away sometime September or October to have this conversation in the fall. And just as a heads up to everybody, in the fall, we're going to go a little bit deeper into Ann's story and how there have actually been some physical manifestations from her work within herself. I'm not giving too much away, but if you go and check out her book and you check out her website, annhince.com, and the book, I knew it 2 seconds ago, and this is what happens when you get older, y'all. You forget things. Pathway to Insight, the book, and then there's also the workbook. I will link everything in the description. Go check it out. What do you have to lose, right? But think about all you could potentially gain in the process. And thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to speak to you again. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. 1 second.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.